blonde, spiky-haired twins Jared and Justin served as the main waitstaff for the restaurant in the main building, and doted on and fawned over the patrons, often elderly and sometimes very rich, but not always. Middle-class folks found the Sally Jack Inn to be reasonably priced for the value. Ghost hunters and young tourists from many countries did as well. When the twins weren't running themselves ragged to please these customers, they could be found on Sally Jack's back smoking porch with the rest of staff and a few guests, smoking and swiping their phones and chatting rapidly as they sat in rocking chairs under a lazily turning ceiling fan around a faux fireplace. The partially covered porch was between the separated kitchen at the back of the inn and the inn itself, and it became a satellite hub of the lounge as well as an employee break area. An area for employees and guests, and food and drinks could be gotten. Every kind of conversation was enjoyed and shared between staff and guests. The enormous legs of horses out on the cobblestone just 15 feet away could be seen as they passed by with their carriages, their enormous horse heads dipping to the beat of their own hooves. Local walking dogs dropped in to chat with patrons and staff, and the porch became a perpetual hub for socializing and resting. The twin men who had worked there for 10 years were brash, funny, warm, and honest, one being more serious than the other. The other was more flamboyant. Anthony trusted those brothers and sometimes enjoyed their company before or after his shift on the porch. Beautiful housekeeping maids passed some time there as well, and Anthony always felt a little shyer when they were present. He did not stay long when they were taking their breaks, much to the disappointment of one of them, Delilah, a woman close to Anthony's age and still beautiful. She was slim and trim, with long, smooth arms, made strong from bed making, and her legs were kept thin from the hours of going up and down stairs. She had come to know and understand that Anthony was not much for words, and she understood it in the way a woman does when she accepts a man. "How you doing, Anthony?" was about all she would trouble him with, and he would respond, doing well, and up and off he would slip. When the maid staff was short due to call-ins, Anthony could be found picking up the slack and moving the maid cart up and down the 3 floors of hallways, room to room, changing beds, cleaning toilets, wiping bathroom sinks and counters, cleaning tubs, and replacing coffee pods and bottled water for the guests. His actual job was that of dishwasher, busboy, and kitchen janitor for the past 30 years, but to Sally, he had become much more. He had become the reliable assistance that helped her run the inn smoothly. When the kitchen had run out of sugar and the evening before Thanksgiving preparations were being made to accommodate more than 100 guests for Thanksgiving buffet, the stores were closed and deliveries were impossible. Breads, cakes, and cranberry sauces were still to be made, and Sugar Papa, without a word, presented a 10-pound sugar bag. "Why, bless your heart, Anthony, you're my sugar daddy. You're really my sweet sugar daddy," Sally cried, relieved and overjoyed at being rescued once again by Anthony. And so the name Sugar Daddy eventually came to replace Anthony, and eventually Sugar Papa was the name that stuck. Anthony loved the name because it had originated from Sally, and it made him feel acknowledged, accepted, and approved. The rest of the staff called him that too. By this point, Sally was so grateful to Anthony that she offered him a permanent residence in one of the second-floor unused storage rooms in the carriage house, along with a raise in salary. She redecorated the room to reflect the same beauty and grandeur as the other rooms at the end, so that Anthony would soon be living in the same historic luxury as the guests. "Your family," she had said. "I want you here all the time. Please stay with us, Anthony." Anthony Sugar Papa accepted, moved out of the cheap motel where he had been living since his release from the service and moved into Sally Jack's for good. He had never worked anywhere else, never had any desire to. He lived in one of the most prestigious inns in Savannah. His meals and lodging were provided, and he made a pretty good wage, but most of all, in Sally and Jack and the rest of the staff at Sally Jack's, he had found family. It felt like family. It felt safe. Having been raised alone by his grandmother, he had yearned all his life for the company of others. This fairly solitary upbringing was only interrupted by the camaraderie he had discovered in the Navy, but after leaving the Navy, his reborn loneliness had folded into resolution, an acceptance of sorts that this was who he was. A lifetime of relative solitude had made his already gentle nature even milder, his quiet nature even quieter. If humans could be compared to voice volume, he was a whisper. In spite of his loneliness, he rarely got over-involved with anyone so that he could keep his distance, but he seemed to have the knack for knowing when to step in and help someone in need, before quietly retreating again to do his chores or his room. He had never had a woman. He had never gotten in trouble with the law. He did not aspire to higher education, and would not even permit himself to think about what it would be like to have any other job. Anthony Sugar Papa had a peaceful, rich, fulfilling life that suited him. It was a pretty good life. At the end of his shift, Anthony Shug removed his apron and donned the burgundy beret from the coat hooks on the wall behind the door of the kitchen. He had only to cross the cobblestones to go home to his room for the night, as the carriage house was directly behind the back of the kitchen and across the street. The sun would soon set as every evening he unlocked the heavy historic door to the building of the carriage house with his skeleton key. Step by step, Sugar Papa slowly ascended the narrow, steep stairwell inside the sumptuously decorated interior up to his room. His long, large, careful feet creaked on the runner on the hardwood floors of the stairs. His room looked out onto the cobblestone streets. In the winter, he turned on the gas fireplace by the knob at the door, and the stray, black kitten that he had adopted from the garbage area behind the kitchen loved to curl up on the hearth next to it and warm itself. The kitten had been licking a torn ketchup package on the ground by the garbage dumpster of the inn when Shug had found it, and so he named his little cat Ketchup. They ate together, slept together, and played together in Shug's solitary but beautiful room. Ketchup spent many days perched on the wide sills of the windows, looking down at the tourists passing below in the side street, or watching and listening to the sounds of the hooves of enormous horses slowly galloping along outside as they pulled carriages full of charmed and contented visitors. The room's windows Sugar Papa often left slightly open because it was protected on the second story by curling wrought iron bars, and he liked being greeted by the feel of real air in the evening. The fresh air, smells, and sounds also kept Ketchup fascinated as she squatted there on the wide sill and sniffed. Hot grease cooking smells filled the lane nightly as appetizers and food were being created for the red-faced, laughing bar patrons across the street at the end, and at neighboring restaurants filled with patrons clamoring for more food, more drinks, more music. Soon the streets below would echo too with the sound of Shug's harmonica as he played the evening's blues, or after he had eaten his go-to styrofoam box dinner from the inn. Sugar Papa's songs filled that evening lane with music for pedestrians, residents, and tourists almost every night. On and on he played as the strains sounded out with the purity and ghostly beauty that made one stop to listen. Shug was skilled at the harp. On Friday nights, Shug would don his beret and go down to River Street that was lined with shops on one side and the river on the other. He was not interested in drink or drugs. He was only interested in what he was driven to do. More chances to perform for the tourists. There he would lay that beret on the bricks across from the shops and begin to play his harmonica as much for himself as for others. He didn't care about the money. The truth was he loved the music, and the beret on the ground gave him the excuse to perform, starting out with some selections he had taught himself by listening to Little Walter, and then moving on to all manner of songs, old and new. Shug could sing, too. His rich, manly, smooth voice would burst into the night air, stopping waterfront visitors in their tracks. Not holding back, and without a note to be ashamed of, it was perfection in waves of air that lay upon and reached out to passers-by. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. Anthony's voice was as much a perfect instrument as his skill at the harmonica. Crowds gathered, tourists eager to enjoy the Savannah experience. Delighted by Anthony's performances, by the end of a few hours he had a hat full of bills and change. Most times he would place dollars in other street musicians' hats on his way home, or slip a bill or two into a street person's hands as he passed. He didn't need the money. He had a salary, shelter, food, and a uniform allowance from Sally Jack's, so his needs were few. Trusted by the street people and other entertainers of the River Street and the side streets of the city, who could count on his monetary contribution to their hats, appreciated by the kiosk clerks at night who sold the trolley tickets because he entertained their trolley-waiting guests, loved by the tourists who thrilled to his performances. Anthony Sugar Papa's gentlemanly ways and good soul shone from his eyes and his demeanor. Unaware of his popularity, he bore the compliments and greetings he received on the street with gratitude and humility, and a beautiful smile and a nod from his beret to anyone. He had little to say unless it was in the form of a song or a helpful word. He had nothing to fear from people, and people didn't fear him. Life was good for Anthony Cleveland Sugar Papa Washington. He was content. He lived his life with grace and peace. And then he saw her. End of part 2.